The U.S. government has stepped up efforts to persuade Israel and Hamas to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. President Joe Biden said such a deal could deter Iran from launching attacks on Israel. Iran has blamed Israel for the killing of a Hamas leader in Tehran. At a UN Security Council meeting, the U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said the temperature in the Middle East must be turned down. Correspondents say it's hard to predict what the Iranians will do.
Now, the United States is deeply concerned about reports of civilian casualties following the August 10th strike by the IDF on the compound in Gaza that included a school and a mosque sheltering desperate, displaced people, including women and children. We have raised our concerns with Israel, and while they indicated they were targeting senior officials from Hamas and Palestinian Jihad, they have an obligation to do everything possible under international humanitarian law to protect civilians. We mourn every civilian lost in this horrific incident and in this conflict. But this much we do know and must be acknowledged. Hamas continues to gather and continues to operate out of schools with no regard for the well-being of civilians. Israel has a right to pursue Hamas. Israel has a right to respond to threats, but how it does that matters.
And that's the U.S. ambassador to the UN there. Well, for more on this, let's cross live to Tel Aviv and speak with Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic. Good to see you, Karl. And the U.S. President Joe Biden saying earlier that the key thing to achieve now in Gaza is a ceasefire deal. Is there much grounds for optimism?
Charles, there are just so many underlying forces to all of this, just to kind of put things in perspective. Tomorrow, there will be a meeting amongst mediators in Doha, Qatar, an Israeli delegation, a Qatar delegation, an Egyptian delegation, but no Hamas delegation. And to give an indication of just how people feel about a possible breakthrough, that even Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, he's canceled or postponed his trip to the region. Also, it's reported that while Israel is sending a very high-level delegation, and by high level, I mean the head of their Shin Bet security agency, their Mossad security agency, which is responsible for external intelligence, and also CIA's head of CIA, William Burns, and Egypt's head of intelligence. Despite all of that, there's no indication that a breakthrough will come through. And then where we are now is this, Charles. If there's no ceasefire deal after this Thursday meeting, Iran is saying, we have to retaliate and respond if there's no deal. And when we look at this, Charles, it's not about just how Iran responds or Hezbollah responds to these two assassinations. It's 2 weeks to the day, Charles. You've had two assassinations and nothing's happened. It's what Israel would do also as a reprisal attack. And that's why people kind of fear a spread of a wider war. And that's why people hear some in Israel saying, well, you know what? Iran's afraid because of the response from Israel. If there's heavy duty damage here in Tel Aviv, by damage, I mean striking anything in Tel Aviv or Haifa near the border, the third biggest city, where there's a big port with civilian casualties or critical infrastructure, Iran will be heavily targeted, its infrastructure, its oil infrastructure, and so would Lebanon. And then beyond all of that, Charles, we talked about the other day, Iran is a nuclear threshold state. And this would give Israel an incentive to say, something, we'll go at your nuclear facilities if you do attack us. So that's why this window is so crucial right now. The final thing is this, Charles, I will say is that meanwhile, this preparation is on the ground for worst case scenario. I mean, in the north, you've got the city of Haifa, the biggest hospital there. They have their underground parking garage of 3 floors of parking. Those 3 floors are now converted to an underground hospital with 2,000 hospital beds, operating theater, fully air conditioned, ready and waiting for any attack if a war starts as early as tomorrow or Friday.
Well, as you said, Karl, I mean, Hamas are saying that they don't intend to participate in those talks. But if they were to get to those talks, what areas do you think there'll be problems agreeing some sort of a deal?
That's a very important question you're asking, Charles, because where Hamas comes from is this. They're saying, listen, what's the use of showing up if you're going to be adding more conditions? Because there's simply, really, the sticking point of Israel is this. We're now in the 11th month, Charles, and what they don't want, quite honestly, they don't want to repeat of October 7th because they know there's so many mistakes were made. So two of the main sticking points is that Israel does not want to give up control of its border with Egypt in the Gaza Strip, or in other words, it's only 6 or 7 miles, Charles. The Gaza Strip alone is a quarter of the size of Abuja, where you are, but that's ground zero there because that's where all the dozens, if not almost 100 tunnels were that allowed Hamas to build its arsenal of weapons and rockets and its network of tunnels bigger than the London Underground over 16 years with continuous smuggling. Israel wants to shut that down. They want control of that border, and also they want to control the movement of people who are now refugees in the south of Gaza to the north, and say we want to make sure no one comes to the north with arms. But the reality is this, Charles. From the start, this was always a situation of two incompatible goals. Eradicating Hamas or getting the return of the hostages. Still, I have 115 hostages there in Gaza. More than half probably no longer alive. Reported that one was killed yesterday, two critically injured, mainly women. A woman, maybe 20 women hostages. A lot of speculation here in Charles in terms of the 20 women hostages that many of them are probably pregnant or were pregnant or are dead. So what's more important, getting all the hostages back or just going for an eradication when you're now in 11 months of war and they're saying this will go into 2025? People are very divided about that, and they're saying, you know what? Maybe it's just best to bring back all the hostages and then go after Hamas later. That's how divided this is, and we really, really are on the brink of what could be a widespread war.
And Karl, we keep hearing from the Israelis, I mean, you are, of course, in Tel Aviv in Israel, we keep hearing from them that they don't have an appetite for a wider conflict. But I mean, taking out the leader of Hamas in Iran and a senior Hezbollah commander in Lebanon, I mean, they're not the actions of someone who wants de-escalation, are they?
Well, Charles, what you're kind of pointing out to is just how there's so much internal dissent here in Israel where I am, because in fact, the U.S. is quite frankly very unhappy, maybe even angry about the timing of this, the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran, because I might have torpedoed any attempt of a ceasefire. And so what it shows is that, what's more important for the Israeli government now, or more specifically, Benjamin Netanyahu? Is it more important for his political survival? Charles, this is a coalition government of 4 to 5 parties. He hangs by a thread in power. Three or four seats. Those 3 or 4 seats are controlled by right-wing extremist parties that not only want to double down on eradicating Hamas, but also are saying that Gazans should be deported, or also are saying that more of the West Bank should be annexed by Israel, and who also are saying that it's more important to eradicate Hamas than to worry about the loss of hostages' lives. And that's the division here in Israel right now where I am, where there's a constant debate of well, what matters more? Continuing on to eradicate the Hamas, making sure October 7th doesn't happen again, or get back the remaining hostages. This is really a third rail for lots of people, very, very emotional. Because right now, Charles, probably more than half the hostages remaining are probably no longer alive.
Karl, thanks very much indeed. Karl Bostic is a RISE special correspondent. He was talking to me on the line there from Tel Aviv.